Look at this healthy crop of rice. I will have more than 1,300 pounds of rice per quarter acre. It was grown without chemical fertilizer, pesticides, or agricultural machinery. I stopped using those things more than 30 years ago. All I've done is sow the seeds and spread straw. Nature has done the rest.
The man you just met is Masanobu Fukuoka, who farms and gardens in Japan. He's living proof that even though we live in an age of high technology and complexity, for living well at home, there's no substitute for the wisdom of simplicity. This is Vermont soil, a long way from those rice paddies in Japan. My name is Vic Sussman. And this is the way I found the garden when I moved here a few weeks ago. Certainly needs some work and restoration. But that's the problem that faces us as gardeners. How do we develop land so it will feed us and build our health while still keeping us in balance with nature? That's why Mr. Fukuoka's story, as told in his book, The One Straw Revolution, and in this film, has such special meaning for me, and I think for you too, because he's moved towards simplicity by imitating nature. Instead of relying solely on technology, he's developed a philosophy and a set of techniques that allow nature to do most of the work. That's what I want to do here at my new place. Find a way to produce food and healthy soil while staying in harmony with the earth. Mr. Fukuoka has done this in his rice fields and his citrus orchard. Now, while I may not grow rice here, I know whatever I do grow will flourish if I can learn to trust and work with nature. Mr. Fukuoka doesn't use chemical fertilizer. He doesn't use pesticide. He doesn't plow his soil or even use prepared compost. He doesn't hold his rice fields in water all summer long the way farmers have done for centuries all over the world. His method requires less work per acre than any other, creates no pollution, and uses almost no fossil fuel. And yet Mr. Fukuoka's rice yields are as high as the most productive farms in Japan. When I first heard about Mr. Fukuoka, I was skeptical. There had to be more to it than just scattering seeds on unturned ground. And then I read his book, and I found that there was indeed much more to it. He grows a permanent ground cover of white clover, and then he spreads a straw mulch to enrich the soil and hold back the weeds. His crops sprout right through the clover. But instead of just telling you about these ideas, let's go back now to Japan to visit with Masanobu Fukuoka. Mr. Fukuoka's farm is near the hillsides overlooking Matsuyama Bay in southern Japan. It's a rich farming area. The climate is mild with plenty of rain. Mr. Fukuoka was raised here, in the village where the Fukuoka family has lived and farmed for more than 1,400 years. He grows about 2 acres of rice and barley, and has a 12-acre orchard of mandarin oranges. This may not seem like much, but in Japan, where field sizes are small, it's considered a large farm. A national highway passes through Mr. Fukuoka's fields. An overhead railroad track has also been built, but is not being used. Students come from all over Japan and the world to learn from Mr. Fukuoka, attracted by his reputation as a teacher and philosopher, and because he's the leading spokesman for natural agriculture in Japan today. The students live in mud-walled huts in Mr. Fukuoka's orchard. They help with the farming chores. Most arrive unannounced, not knowing what to expect. They stay for a few days or a few weeks and move on. Some remain for as long as several years. There are no modern conveniences. Students carry drinking water in buckets from the spring, cook meals over a wood-burning fireplace, light their huts with candles and kerosene lamps. They live entirely on food they grow themselves or gather nearby, wild herbs, vegetables, and fruit, fish from streams and ponds. They work hard from early morning each day. Their jobs vary with the season and the weather.
The more the farmer increases the scale of his operation, the more his body and spirit are dissipated. He falls away from a spiritually satisfying life. A life of small-scale farming may appear to be primitive, but it allows me to study the great way. I believe that if one deeply understands the everyday world in which one lives, the greatest of worlds will be revealed.
Mr. Fukuoka purposely has his students live this way because it helps develop the sensitivity necessary to tune in to nature's subtle voice. His philosophy is inspiring and has helped many people understand how they may live more thoughtfully here in America. Masanobu Fukuoka's farm is a rich mixture of trees, shrubs, herbs, and vegetables growing in a ground cover of weeds and clover. Chickens run freely foraging beneath the orchard trees, turning out the kind of eggs that can't be bought in stores. Goats are raised in the orchard too. The whole system works in harmony. Besides a traditional organic garden near his house in the village, Mr. Fukuoka grows vegetables in the spaces between the orchard trees. He mixes the seeds of cabbage, turnip, carrot, soybeans, cucumber, and many other vegetables and sows them in the spring. Then he cuts the clover and spreads the clipping over the seeds as mulch. Some vegetables go unharvested. They reseed and come up by themselves year after year, just as tomatoes, pumpkins, or corn will do in any garden. Mr. Fukuoka hasn't always lived on the farm. As a young man, he left his village home to be trained as a microbiologist. He worked in a laboratory in Yokohama as an agricultural customs inspector. Then, when he was 25 years old, Mr. Fukuoka had a flash of insight. He suddenly realized the perfect balance and abundance of nature.
I can still remember it was the morning of the 15th of May. A night heron appeared, gave a sharp cry, and flew away into the distance. In an instant, all my doubts and confusion vanished. Everything I believed in was swept away with the wind. I felt that I understood nothing. My spirit became light and clear. All my agonies, dreams, and illusions disappeared. Something one might call true nature stood revealed. From the experience of that morning, my life changed completely. Despite the change, I remained a simple, foolish man. And there has been no change in this from then to now.
Mr. Fukuoka saw that problems arise when people think they can improve on nature. So he decided to leave his job and returned home to test his ideas in his own field. At that time, modern technology and chemical agriculture were just being introduced in Japan. The combination of machines and chemicals allowed Japanese farmers to get about the same yields as before, but the work was cut by half or more. It seemed like a dream come true. And in one generation, almost everyone had switched to chemical agriculture. It wasn't so apparent then, as it is now, that the new system caused pollution and depleted the fertility of the soil. Masanobu Fukuoka imitates natural processes as closely as he can. He cooperates with nature instead of struggling to overcome it. Let's see now how Mr. Fukuoka's close-to-nature techniques work in his rice fields. Mr. Fukuoka coats his rice seed with clay, forming tiny pellets before sowing them. Years ago, he tried throwing the rice seed directly onto the ground, the way it would fall naturally, but birds and insects ate much of the seed, or it rotted before it could germinate. Then Mr. Fukuoka got the idea of coating the seeds with clay, pelletizing them, thus preventing birds, mice, and slugs from eating the seeds before they could sprout. Ingenious. To make the pellets, the seed is soaked overnight and then mixed with clay. Then it's pushed through chicken wire and allowed to dry in the sun for a day. Ideally, there will be one seed in each pellet. It's possible to make enough pellets in one day to seed several acres. The rice seed pellets are sown right into stands of ripening barley, about 3 or 4 weeks before harvest. Growing both rice and winter grain like barley in the same field every year helps to control weeds by never letting the land stay idle. It's always too full of rice or barley for weeds to get established. It's also an efficient way to use land. Despite the intensity of double cropping, the soil improves every year because Mr. Fukuoka returns all the rice and barley straw to the soil, which digests it into rich, fertile topsoil. The rice seed sprouts from the pellets about 25 days after sowing, just as the barley is mature and ready for harvest. The barley is harvested near the end of May. The rice seedlings are trampled by the feet of the harvesters, but soon recover.
The usual way to develop a plan is to ask, how about trying this, or how about trying that? But that approach only makes the farmer busier. My way was opposite. I was aiming at the pleasant, natural way of farming, which makes the work easier instead of harder. How about not doing this? How about not doing that? That was my way of thinking. I finally reached the conclusion that there was no need to plow, no need to apply fertilizer, no need to use insecticides. In fact, there are few agricultural practices that are necessary at all.